All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are taking a deep dive into something, well, I think you're pretty familiar with it, stress.
Yeah.
But we're not just going to be talking about the, oh, I missed the bus or I spilled coffee on my shirt kind of stress. We are going way deeper
Way deeper.
than that
Yeah.
into how stress, especially chronic, long-term stress, can actually set the stage for some serious health problems.
That's right. And what's so fascinating is that we have such a diverse range of sources to really dig into today.
Oh, yeah?
Everything from studies on our primate cousins, those baboons, to the history of medical treatments. We'll be exploring all those surprising ways stress can impact your overall well-being.
So if you've ever wondered why you seem to, catch every cold going around when you're stressed out, or why, stress seems to make you feel just down in the dumps,
Absolutely.
this deep dive is for you.
It is. And it all starts with your body's amazing, but sometimes frustrating stress response.
Okay, stress response, lay it on me. What's that all about?
This might come as a surprise to some, but your body's stress response is actually a hand-me-down, an evolutionary leftover
Okay.
from a time when threats were, let's just say, a lot more tooth and claw.
Okay, so we're talking way, way back.
Way, way back.
Okay, I like it.
So, picture yourself back on the savannah, right? You're a zebra just minding your own business when suddenly a lion bursts onto the scene.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah, that zebra's heart's going to be pounding. Its muscles are going to tense up. It's going to be flooded with hormones like adrenaline.
Oh, yeah.
It's primed to run for its life.
Makes sense.
And that, my friend, is the stress response in action, a brilliant system for dealing with immediate danger.
Okay, yeah, fight or flight.
Fight or flight, exactly.
Get out of there.
Right, but I'm guessing our modern stressors, they look a little different than a hungry lion these days.
Yeah, it's just a little bit.
Yeah, these days our lions are more like deadlines, traffic jams, that never-ending to-do list.
Yeah, or that email that just came in.
Or that email, yes.
Yep.
All those things, they're chronic psychological stresses that our bodies weren't really designed to handle 24/7.
So we're basically stuck with this ancient system that's trying to handle all of our, very modern 21st century problems.
Exactly.
And that mismatch, I'm guessing, is where things start to get a little interesting and maybe a little worrisome health-wise.
You got it. So let's take a closer look at what's happening inside your body when that stress response kicks in, all right? Those hormones we talked about, like adrenaline, they're just part of the story.
Okay, there's more.
There's more.
Bring it on.
There's also glucocorticoids.
Glucocorticoids.
Glucocorticoids, yeah.
Okay, that sounds intense.
They are, and they're powerful hormones that are secreted by your adrenal glands.
All right, so where are those?
Those sit right on top of your kidneys.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and they work in a similar way to adrenaline, but they sort of act over a longer period of time, keeping that stress response humming along. And here's a fun little tidbit for you.
Okay.
For the longest time, scientists, they didn't even believe that the brain could produce hormones.
Seriously?
Yeah.
The brain, like this control center for our entire body?
Exactly.
They didn't think it could make hormones.
They thought that hormones were only made by glands in the body, not the brain.
That's wild.
It's crazy now, right? But they eventually figured it out.
Thank goodness.
Yes. And now we know that the brain is a hormonal powerhouse.
Wow.
Sending out those signals.
It's like the conductor of the stress response orchestra.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It sends out those hormones that then signal the pituitary gland.
Okay.
Which then orchestrates that whole hormonal cascade of the stress response.
It's like this whole intricate system is playing out inside us all the time.
It is.
Whether we're actually facing a real, life or death threat or just stressing about, missing that bus.
Or giving a presentation at work.
Oh, yeah, definitely public speeding. Yikes.
Yeah, all those things.
But, okay, so we've got this intricate system, we've got these hormones flowing, but how does all this actually impact our health? Let's get specific.
Okay, so let's get specific. Let's talk about some real-world consequences of chronic stress, the kind that just keeps simmering in the background.
Okay.
Let's start with heart health.
Okay, heart health.
You know that feeling of your heart pounding when you're stressed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, over time, that chronic activation can actually contribute to high blood pressure or hypertension.
And as we all know, high blood pressure is a major risk factor for heart disease.
It is, but there's actually more to the story.
Okay, I was hoping you'd say that.
There is. It's not just about your heart working harder.
Okay.
Stress hormones can actually damage the lining of your blood vessels.
What?
Yeah, making them more susceptible to plaque buildup.
So it's like they're getting weaker, and then all that gunk is building up.
Exactly. And that, of course, can lead to heart attacks or even sudden cardiac death. Yeah, so it's like stress is setting the stage for those serious heart problems down the road.
Got it.
Okay, so we got the heart.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another system that really takes a hit from chronic stress.
Uh-oh. What else?
It's your metabolism.
Metabolism,
that intricate dance of how your body processes food and energy, it's all connected.
Okay, so how does stress throw a wrench into all that?
Well, think of it like a domino effect.
Okay, I like that visual.
Yeah, remember those glucocorticoids we talked about?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, they can lead to insulin resistance, meaning your body doesn't respond to insulin as efficiently as it should.
And insulin is that, like, key hormone that regulates blood sugar, right?
It is the key.
Yeah.
So when your body becomes resistant to insulin, those glucose levels, they stay elevated.
Not good.
Not good.
Yeah.
And this, over time, can increase the risk of developing type 2 diabetes and other metabolic problems.
Oh, wow.
And guess what?
I bet it's not good.
It's not good. Those metabolic issues can then make cardiovascular problems even worse.
Oh, no.
It's like a vicious cycle.
So it all comes back to the heart.
It does. Yeah, it's all connected.
Ugh. Stress is like public enemy number one, I'm starting to realize.
It really can be if you let it.
What about ulcers?
Ulcers.
Yeah, I always thought those were caused by spicy food.
It's a very, very common misconception.
Really?
Yeah, while it's true that a bacterium called H. pylori is often involved, stress actually doesn't cause the ulcer to form, but it makes them worse during the recovery period.
Huh. So you're telling me that you're more likely to have ulcer problems after a stressful period is over?
It's a little counterintuitive, right?
It is. I wouldn't have guessed that at all.
But here's why. During that stress response, your body, it shifts resources away from things like digestion to power those fight or flight muscles.
Makes sense.
So when the stress subsides, your body ramps up those digestive processes again, including the production of stomach acid. So if there's already damage from that bacteria,
yikes,
that surge of stomach acid can really make things a lot worse.
Okay, so you don't want to be hitting the hot wings right after.
Right, probably not the best idea.
A stressful event.
Yeah.
Got it.
It's a perfect example of how stress doesn't directly cause a disease, but it creates the perfect conditions for it to develop or worsen.
Yeah, okay. Starting to see a pattern here.
Mm-hmm.
What else is on the stress hit list?
Well, let's move on to another incredibly complex system that's heavily influenced by stress.
Oh, boy.
The immune system.
The immune system, yeah.
Yeah. You ever notice that you seem to get sick more easily when you're stressed out?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Like, without a doubt.
Well, there's actually a very real connection there.
Okay, tell me more.
Your immune system, it's your body's defense against all sorts of invaders,
The bad guys.
The bad guys, exactly. Bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi, the whole lot. Yeah, and it's this complex and delicate system, and stress can really throw it way out of whack.
Okay, so how does stress actually mess with my immune system?
Well, those glucocorticoids we keep talking about.
Those guys again.
Those guys, they play a role here too.
Oh, great.
But in the short term, they can actually be helpful for the immune system.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Stress can be good for my immune system?
Well, in a way, yes.
Okay.
They can be helpful by mobilizing immune cells and getting them where they need to go.
So it's like a quick boost.
It's like a quick boost, yeah.
Okay.
But the problem is when that stress becomes chronic, those same glucocorticoids start to suppress immune function.
Ugh, there it is again, the long-term stress.
Yeah, it's all about the long game.
There.
They can interfere with the production and activity of different immune cells, making you more susceptible to infections.
So short-term stress,
Yeah.
long-term stress.
Suppression.
Got it. And it gets even more intriguing.
Stress can actually reactivate latent viruses that have been lying dormant in your body.
Wait, so stress can wake up, like sleeping viruses?
It can, yeah. Things like herpes, Epstein-Barr virus, which can cause mononucleosis, or chronic fatigue syndrome. They can get reactivated.
That's a little creepy.
Yeah, it's another example of how stress can have these delayed effects on our health, You might not even realize that the stress you experienced weeks or months ago could be contributing to you feeling sick right now.
Okay, that's mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
What about stress and cancer? I feel like I've heard so many different things about whether they're connected.
Yeah, it's a really complicated area of research. There's a lot of debate. Some studies have suggested a link between stress and increased cancer risk, but the evidence, it's not conclusive.
Okay.
There are just so many factors that can contribute to cancer development, things like genetics, lifestyle, environmental exposures. It's just really hard to isolate the impact of stress from all those other variables.
So do we know for sure if stress can cause cancer?
We don't definitively know. But while I wouldn't go as far as to say that negative attitudes cause cancer, there is some evidence that stress can, in some cases, accelerate tumor growth or interfere with treatment.
So maybe there's a kernel of truth in there, but it's not the whole picture.
Yeah, it's not the whole picture. The mind-body connection is incredibly powerful. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And our thoughts and emotions, they can definitely impact our physical health. But, it's important to be critical of big claims.
Yeah.
And look for evidence-based approaches to both stress management and cancer treatment.
Absolutely. Okay, before we move on from the physical impacts of stress, I want to talk about another fascinating but kind of disturbing effect.
Okay.
How stress can actually inhibit growth in children.
Yes, the phenomenon of stress dwarfism.
Stress dwarfism.
Yeah, it really highlights just how powerful that mind-body connection can be. Imagine a child who is otherwise healthy, getting enough to eat, no major illnesses, and yet they just stop growing.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking, and in many of these cases, the root cause is severe stress, often due to emotional neglect or abuse.
Wow.
And their little bodies, they're just stuck in survival mode.
Yeah.
And growth, which takes a lot of energy, gets put on hold.
So their bodies are so focused on dealing with the stress that they don't have the resources left to grow.
That's exactly it.
Wow.
And the fascinating but sad part is it's not just about not getting enough calories. There's a whole hormonal cascade that gets disrupted by stress.
Okay, I am ready to dive deeper into the hormones. What's going on there?
Well, growth hormone, obviously, that's key for growth.
Makes sense.
But stress can actually interfere with the release of growth hormone,
Okay.
as well as the body's sensitivity to it.
Oh, wow.
And it also messes with other hormones that are involved in growth, like thyroid hormone and insulin. It's like a whole orchestra of hormones, but they're all playing out of tune.
There's that domino effect again.
Exactly. Precisely.
Wow.
And there's this really incredible case study that shows just how profound the impact of psychological factors can be on physical development.
Okay, I'm listening.
There was this young boy who was experiencing stress dwarfism, and the doctors noticed that his growth hormone levels would surge whenever a particular nurse was caring for him.
Wait, so his body was responding to the presence of this caring person?
It was, yes.
Wow.
When the nurse was around, his growth hormone levels would go up and he would start growing again.
Oh, that's incredible.
But when that nurse was away, his growth hormone would plummet and his growth would stall. It's like his body was saying, okay, I feel safe now. It's okay to grow.
Wow. That's amazing, but also sad.
It is. It's a bittersweet story.
But on the flip side, is it possible that stress could actually stimulate growth in some cases?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and a little bit controversial.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah, there's some research, mostly from anthropologists who are studying different cultures, that suggests certain types of stress in early childhood, they might actually lead to taller adults.
Wait, so you're saying that putting kids through stressful rituals could make them taller?
Well, that's what some of the research suggests, but we have to be really careful here.
Okay.
These studies are correlational, meaning they show a link, but we can't prove that stress caused the increased growth.
So it could be that the taller tribes just happen to have more stressful rituals.
Exactly.
Or there could be other factors at play, like diet or genetics.
Right. And of course, there are some huge ethical considerations.
Yeah.
Even if stress could promote growth in some cases, it's not like we're going to start intentionally stressing kids out to make them taller.
Right. No, that would be terrible.
That would be unethical and just, no, not a good idea.
Okay, so the link between stress and growth is complicated, to say the least.
It is complicated, but it's a really great example of that intricate interplay between our minds and bodies.
And speaking of intricate interplay, let's talk about another area where stress can really wreak havoc.
Reproduction.
Ah, yes, the stress-sex connections.
The stress-sex connection. All right, let's unpack that one.
It's a really complex web of hormonal interactions and behavioral changes
Oh, boy.
that can affect both males and females.
So break it down for me. How does stress mess with reproduction?
Okay, well, stress can disrupt the delicate balance of hormones that are needed for fertility in both men and women.
Okay.
For men, chronic stress can actually suppress testosterone production.
That's not good.
No, not good. It can lead to lower libido, erectile dysfunction, and even problems with sperm production.
Yikes. That's like the opposite of what you want if you're trying to.
Exactly. It's not a guy's best friend when it
Yeah.
comes to, well,
Yeah,
making babies.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about hormones. You're right, it's not just about hormones. Stress can also interfere with the nervous system pathways that are involved in sexual arousal and performance. It's like your body is saying, hey, now's not the time to be thinking about procreation. We are in survival mode.
It makes sense. You're running from a lion.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about for women? How does stress impact their reproductive system?
Well, it's equally complex, but in different ways.
Okay.
Stress can interfere with ovulation,
Okay.
making it harder to get pregnant.
Uh-huh.
It can also disrupt the menstrual cycle, leading to irregular periods or even amenorrhea, which is the absence of periods altogether.
Wow, so stress can really throw a woman's whole cycle off.
It can.
Wow.
And it can even increase the risk of miscarriage or preterm births.
That's, yeah, it really is.
It's pretty intense.
Wow, okay, so we've seen how stress can suppress testosterone in men, disrupt ovulation in women. Are there any other ways it interferes with reproduction?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Stress can also lead to increased prolactin level.
Prolactin.
Prolactin, yeah.
But we're talking about fertility here, not breastfeeding.
I know, it seems a little odd, but high prolactin can actually suppress ovulation,
Okay,
making it harder to get pregnant.
interesting.
And it can also affect behavior. Both men and women often experience a decreased libido and sexual desire when they're chronically stressed.
Yeah, who's in the mood when they're feeling overwhelmed and stressed out, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And this can have implications for human societies as well. Think about traditional hunter-gatherer cultures where women breastfed frequently and for extended periods.
Okay, following.
Well, frequent breastfeeding keeps those prolactin levels high, which, as we've seen, suppresses ovulation.
Okay.
So women in those cultures, they tended to have far fewer periods throughout their lives.
Compared to modern women who, might have hundreds of periods.
Exactly, exactly. And some researchers speculate that this difference in the number of periods could be linked to the higher rates of gynecological diseases that we see in modern societies.
Wow, so the stress of modern life, coupled with, our decreased breastfeeding practices, could be contributing to these health problems.
That's one hypothesis, but it really highlights the complex interplay between our biology, our environment, and our cultural practices.
It's all connected.
Yep.
Okay, so stress can really mess with reproduction on so many levels. Is there anything else we need to know about this stress-sex connection?
Yeah, just one more important point. Despite all these mechanisms for disrupting reproduction, stress doesn't shut the system down entirely.
Okay, so you're telling me that even with all this stress, people can still get pregnant.
It's a testament to the resilience of the reproductive system.
Wow, the body is amazing.
It is, but that doesn't mean that we should just ignore the impact of stress.
Right.
Chronic stress can still make it harder to conceive,
Right.
increase the risk of complications, and, just make the whole process a lot less enjoyable.
Definitely not ideal.
No, not ideal.
Okay, I think we've covered that connection pretty thoroughly. Let's shift gears and talk about another area where stress can have a huge impact. Mental health.
Ah, yes, the mind-body connection in full force.
Right.
When we're talking about mental health, two major players we need to discuss are depression and anxiety.
Okay, so depression, anxiety, we all experience sadness and worry sometimes, right?
Yeah.
At what point do those normal emotions become clinical disorders?
That's a great question, and it's not always easy to draw a clear line.
Yeah.
But with depression, it's more than just feeling sad or down, you know? It's a persistent state of low mood that affects your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, even your physical health.
So it's not just a case of snap out of it.
Not at all. Depression is a real illness
Yeah.
with biological, psychological, and social dimensions. And one of the key features of depression is what are called vegetative symptoms.
Vegetative symptoms. Okay, those sound unpleasant.
They can be, yeah, they include things like sleep disturbances, changes in appetite, fatigue, loss of interest in things you used to enjoy.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely experienced some of those.
And here's the connection to stress.
Okay.
Many people with depression, they also have elevated levels of glucocorticoids.
There they are again, those stress hormones. They just keep popping up everywhere.
They're everywhere, and it makes sense when you think about it, right? Depression, it's a state of chronic stress.
Yeah.
Even if you can't pinpoint a specific external stressor, it's like your body's stress response system is just stuck in the on position.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so it's not just psychological distress. There's a physiological component as well.
Okay, and to make things even more complex, There are actually multiple types of depression.
There are, yes.
What, there's more than one kind of depression?
There's more than one kind, yes, and they can look quite different.
Okay, tell me everything.
All right, so the most common type is called unipolar depression.
Unipolar?
Unipolar, where the person experiences periods of really severe low mood,
Okay.
interspersed with periods of feeling relatively normal.
So they swing between depression and feeling okay.
Exactly. But then there's another type called bipolar depression or manic depression.
Manic depression, that sounds a lot more intense.
It is more intense, yeah. People with bipolar disorder, they experience those episodes of severe depression, but they also have periods of mania.
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 What is that?
Mania is a state of really heightened energy, euphoria, racing thoughts,
Oh, wow.
impulsive behavior that can be very disruptive
Okay.
and even dangerous.
It's not just being, like, happy and energetic. It's more like being out of control.
Exactly. Exactly.
Got it.
And it's important to remember that both unipolar and bipolar depression,
Yeah,
they are serious illnesses that require professional treatment.
absolutely. But what actually causes depression?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Scientists have been grappling with it for decades.
Uh-huh.
There are many different theories, and one popular one focuses on the role of neurotransmitters.
Neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine.
Yes.
Aren't those the, like, happy chemicals?
They are often portrayed that way, but it's actually more complex than that.
Okay.
The neurotransmitter theory of depression suggests that there's an imbalance or a dysregulation in these brain chemicals, especially serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine.
So it's not just that people with depression have, like, low levels of these happy chemicals.
Not necessarily, no. It could be that they have too much or too little,
Okay.
or that their brains aren't responding to them properly.
So it's more about a disruption in the system than just, like, a shortage.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's a lot of debate about the specific mechanisms that are involved.
Makes sense. The brain is so complex.
It is, and to complicate things even further,
Oh.
there are also psychological and social factors that contribute to depression. Things like childhood trauma, chronic stress, social isolation, negative thinking patterns, all those things can increase your risk of developing depression.
So it's not just biology. It's also our experiences and how we interpret them.
Exactly. And this leads us to another theory of depression that I find really fascinating.
I would lay it on me.
It's called the psychodynamic perspective, which is all about unresolved emotional conflicts, often stemming from childhood.
Psychodynamic. That sounds like something Freud would talk about.
It is something Freud would talk about.
All right, tell me more.
The psychodynamic perspective, it views depression as a result of these unresolved emotional conflicts, often stemming from childhood experiences.
So it's like those childhood issues are bubbling up and causing depression later in life.
In a way, yes.
Sure.
Freud himself, he believed that depression is a form of aggression turned inward.
Aggression turned inward.
Yeah, he argued that when we experience loss or disappointment,
Uh-huh.
we can sometimes turn our anger and frustration inward, leading to self-criticism, guilt, and eventually depression.
Instead of expressing our anger outwardly, we direct it towards ourselves.
That's the basic idea, and it might help to explain why people with depression often experience feelings of worklessness and self-loathing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
But of course, not everyone agrees with Freud's theories. He was a pretty controversial figure.
he was.
Okay, so I've got neurotransmitters, childhood trauma, unresolved conflicts.
Yeah.
It's starting to feel like depression is this, like, multifaceted beast with a million different heads.
It's true. Depression is incredibly complex. There's no single explanation. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear.
Okay.
Certain brain regions, they play a key role in the development and experience of depression.
Okay, brain regions. So we're not just talking about chemicals floating around.
Not entirely, no. There are actual structures in your brain that are involved in mood regulation, emotional processing, stress responses. And one of the most important is the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC.
The ACC. Okay, what makes that one so special?
Well, the ACC is part of the limbic system, which is often called the emotional brain.
Okay.
And it plays a key role in processing emotions, regulating your responses to stress, and forming memories.
So it's really important.
It's really important. And studies have shown that the ACC, it's often hyperactive in people with depression. It's like it's constantly processing those negative emotions and threat signals.
So it's overreacting.
Yeah, it's overreacting. It's on high alert all the time.
Okay, what else is going on in the brain when someone's experiencing depression?
Another really important region is the amygdala.
The amygdala, isn't that the one that's involved in, like, fear and anxiety?
It is, but in people with depression, the amygdala seems to be recruited into a slightly different role.
Oh.
Instead of just processing fear, it also becomes hyperactive in response to sad stimuli.
So it's like it's amplifying those feelings of sadness.
It's amplifying the sadness, yeah, and this heightened activity in the amygdala can then feed back into the ACC, creating this vicious cycle of negative emotional processing.
So it's this, like, complex interplay between different brain regions, and they're all contributing to the overall picture of depression.
Exactly, and understanding these neural pathways, it's really crucial for developing more effective treatments.
Yeah, okay, we've explored depression pretty in depth.
Yeah.
What about anxiety? How does that differ?
Well, anxiety is often described as a state of apprehension, worry, and fear, usually in response to a perceived threat.
Okay.
And while anxiety can be a normal
Right.
and even helpful emotion in certain situations.
Like if you're about to give a big presentation or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it can help you prepare,
Yeah.
but it becomes a problem when it's excessive,
Right.
persistent, and it interferes with your daily life.
Got it. So it's not just a feeling, it's also got all these physical symptoms too.
It does. People with anxiety often experience things like a racing heart, sweating, trembling, shortness of breath, even digestive problems.
So it's like that fight or flight response we talked about earlier, but it's being triggered by, like, thoughts and worries, not actual physical threats.
Exactly. And just like with depression, specific brain regions are involved in anxiety,
Okay.
particularly the amygdala.
The amygdala again. So it's involved in both depression and anxiety.
It is. It plays a slightly different role in each, but it's definitely a key player in both.
Okay. So what's it doing in anxiety?
Well, in anxiety, the amygdala's role is more focused on fear processing. It's constantly scanning for threats, and triggering that fight or flight response even when there's no real danger.
So it's like a faulty alarm system that keeps going off even when there's no fire.
Exactly, a perfect analogy. And this overactivity in the amygdala, it can lead to those physical symptoms of anxiety we talked about.
Okay. So we've got depression, anxiety.
Mhm.
Are there any other mental health conditions that are linked to stress?
Well, there's one more personality type we should touch on.
Type A?
Type A personality.
Yeah.
Those are the people who are always rushing around, stressed out, glued to their phones.
Okay. That's the stereotype, yes.
Okay.
But the type A personality was actually first described by cardiologists.
It's cardiologists. What do heart doctors have to do with personality types?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. These cardiologists, they noticed that many of their heart patients shared certain personality traits. They were ambitious, driven, competitive, impatient, and often hostile.
Okay, so your classic workaholic type.
Exactly. And these doctors believed that this type A behavior pattern was actually a risk factor for heart disease.
Seriously, your personality could increase your risk of heart problems.
That was their theory, and it generated a lot of attention.
Okay.
But the story of type A personality, it's more complicated than that.
Oh, what happened?
Well, initially the research was widely accepted, and type A became a household term.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of it. But then other studies failed to replicate those findings. And the link between type A behavior and heart disease, it became less clear-cut.
So the initial excitement kind of fizzled out.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
But research continued.
Okay.
And scientists started to dig deeper into the specific traits that make up that type A pattern. And one trait in particular stood out as a strong predictor of heart problems.
Which one?
Hostility.
Hostility. So it's not just about being, like, driven and competitive. It's about being angry and aggressive.
Exactly. Studies have shown that people who are chronically hostile, cynical, prone to anger, they're at higher risk for heart disease, atherosclerosis, stroke, even early death from any cause.
Wow, so it's not just about stress in general, but how you react to stress that really matters.
You got it. It underscores the importance of understanding the nuances of personality and how they interact with our physical health.
Okay, so we've covered the dark side of stress, its impact on our hearts, metabolism, immune systems, growth, reproduction, mental health. It's a lot to take in, but this isn't a doom and gloom show, right? There has to be some help here.
You're absolutely right. We are not helpless victims of stress. There are things we can do to manage stress and lessen its negative effects. And that's what we'll focus on in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, coping with stress, I am definitely ready for some good news.
Yeah, we need a little bit of optimism here.
But before we jump into those coping strategies, maybe just a quick recap of what we've learned so far about this stress monster.
Good idea. All right, so stress. It's this ancient physiological response that's been hijacked by modern life.
Yeah, our bodies are reacting to emails and traffic jams as if they were, like, saber-toothed tigers.
Exactly. It's no wonder we're all so stressed out.
Yeah, makes sense.
And this chronic stress, it can increase the risk of all sorts of health problems. Everything from heart disease and diabetes to ulcers and even a weakened immune system.
It really can. And we learned that it can even stunt growth in children, mess with our reproductive systems, and contribute to those mental health issues like depression and anxiety.
It's a pretty bleak picture, but the good news is we are not powerless.
Okay, I am all ears. What can we do to fight back against this stress monster?
Well, one of the most powerful tools we have is social support.
Social support, you mean like having friends and family to talk to?
Exactly. Humans are social creatures. We are wired for connection, and studies have shown that people with strong social networks, they tend to be more resilient to stress and have better overall health.
So it's not just about like venting to your friends when you're stressed.
Yeah.
There's an actual physiological benefit to having close relationships.
Absolutely. When you feel connected and supported, your body releases oxytocin.
Oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, I've heard of that.
That's one of its nicknames.
Okay.
And it plays a key role in social bonding and reducing anxiety.
So having close friends and family is good for us, both mentally and physically. But what if you're more of an introvert? Like, do you have to be a social butterfly to reap those benefits?
Not at all. Introverts can benefit just as much from social connection, even if they prefer smaller groups or one-on-one interactions. The key is to have at least a few people in your life that you feel comfortable confiding in and who make you feel supported.
Quality over quantity, right?
Exactly. And speaking of quality, let's talk about another important factor in stress management:
Okay.
predictability and control.
Predictability and control, what do those have to do with stress?
Well, think about it this way. Stress is often amplified when we feel like things are unpredictable and out of our control.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like if you're stuck in traffic with no idea when you'll get home, it's way more stressful than knowing it'll be an hour delay.
Precisely. And there's actually some really fascinating research on this using, you guessed it, rats.
Rats, of course, the
Sure.
stars of stress research.
They're the workhorses, that's for sure. So in these experiments, researchers exposed rats to shocks.
Shocks, poor rats.
I know, but some rats had a warning signal before the shock while others didn't.
So some rats knew it was coming, while others were totally caught off guard.
Exactly. And the rats that had the warning signal actually showed less stress than the rats that didn't.
Really? Even though they both got shocked, that seems kind of counterintuitive.
I know, it's strange. But it turns out predictability is super important for managing our stress levels. When we know what to expect, even if it's something unpleasant, our bodies can prepare and we feel less overwhelmed.
So it's not about avoiding unpleasant things altogether. It's about having some sense of control over when and how they happen.
Precisely. And this has real implications for our everyday lives. Think about a stressful work project. If you have a clear timeline, regular check-ins with your boss, and some autonomy over how you approach the task, it'll likely be less stressful than a project with vague deadlines, constant micromanaging, and no clear direction.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
The more control we have over our work, the less stressful it feels.
Exactly. And you can take steps to increase your sense of control in other areas of your life as well. Like if you're dreading a social event,
Yeah.
try preparing in advance by, thinking about who you'll talk to, maybe setting a time limit for how long you'll stay.
So it's about taking small steps to regain a sense of agency, even in situations that feel stressful.
Exactly. And these strategies can make a big difference in how your mind and body handle stress. So we've got social support,
Sure.
predictability and control.
Okay.
What other tools can we add to our stress-fighting arsenal?
Well, this one might seem obvious, but it's super powerful. Exercise.
Oh, yeah. Gotta get moving.
I know exercise is good for you, but how does it actually help with stress?
Well, in a few different ways. First, remember how the stress response is all about prepping your body for physical activity? Well, when you exercise, you're essentially giving your body that outlet it's craving. You're burning off that excess energy and tension, giving your cardiovascular system a healthy workout.
So it's like channeling that fight or flight energy into something productive.
Exactly.
Huh.
Plus, exercise releases endorphins, which are those feel-good chemicals with mood-boosting and pain-reducing effects. They're what give you that runner's high.
And even if you're not a marathon runner, any kind of movement can increase those endorphins and improve your mood, right?
Absolutely. And exercise can also help improve your sleep quality, which is another key factor in stress management.
Sleep, that's something I definitely don't get enough of.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
Sleep deprivation is a major stressor, and it creates this vicious cycle.
Okay.
Stress makes it harder to sleep, and lack of sleep makes us more vulnerable to stress.
It's like a double whammy.
It is, but regular physical activity can help to regulate your natural sleep-wake cycles,
Okay.
also known as our circadian rhythms.
Circadian rhythms. Oh.
Yeah, and it also reduces anxiety and promotes relaxation, making it easier to fall asleep and stay asleep.
So exercise helps manage stress, improves our mood, helps us sleep better. What's not to love? Except maybe those sore muscles the next day.
There's always a trade-off, right?
Mm.
But the benefits far outweigh the drawbacks, and the key is to find activities that you enjoy that fit into your life. It doesn't have to be strenuous or take up hours of your time. Even a brisk walk or a yoga class can make a difference.
Yeah, just get moving.
Just get moving, that's the key. And, speaking of things that can be part of a routine, let's touch on something that's a bit more controversial.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Religion and spirituality.
Religion and spirituality, how do those fit into the stress equation?
Well, studies have shown that people who are religious or spiritual, they often report lower stress levels and better overall health. Of course, this is a complicated area, and
Right.
it's really tough to separate the effects of religion from other factors.
Like maybe religious people tend to have stronger social networks or healthier lifestyles in general.
Yeah. That's a valid point. But some researchers believe that religious beliefs and practices themselves, they can provide a sense of meaning, purpose, and hope, which are all incredibly helpful when you're dealing with stress.
So it's like having a framework for understanding the world and your place in it, which can be really comforting during those difficult times.
Exactly. And religious communities often offer those strong social support networks, which, as we already know, are key for managing stress.
Okay, so religion and spirituality might offer some benefits, but I'm guessing more research is needed to really tease apart how it all works.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also important to remember that these benefits aren't limited to any specific religion or belief system.
Okay.
It's about finding what resonates with you and provides meaning and connection.
So social support, predictability and control, exercise, religion, or spirituality as potential tools in our stress-fighting toolbox. Anything else we can add?
Well, I would say the most powerful tool you have is your own perspective.
Perspective, you mean like how we think about stress?
Exactly. Our perception of a stressful event dramatically impacts how our bodies react. There's this fascinating study that really highlights this.
Okay, I love a good study. Lay it on me.
All right, so researchers created this tickle machine for rats.
A tickle machine.
A tickle machine, yeah, basically a device that gently stroked their backs.
Oh, that's pretty cute.
Right. But here's the interesting part.
Okay.
When the rats controlled the machine themselves, they didn't really react much at all, but when the researchers controlled the machine and tickled the rats unexpectedly, their brains lit up, showing pleasure and anticipation.
So the rats enjoyed the tickling more when it was a surprise.
They did, and this shows just how important our sense of control is. Our brains interpret the same experience in very different ways, depending on whether we feel in control.
Okay.
The same sensation, it can be pleasurable, neutral, or even stressful,
Oh.
based solely on our perception.
So it's not just the event itself, it's how we think about the event that really matters.
Exactly, and this has huge implications for how we manage stress. If we can learn to reframe our perceptions, see stressful situations as challenges instead of threats, we can actually change how our bodies react.
So it's all about finding that mental shift, having that I've got this attitude, even when things are tough.
You got it. And it all goes back to that evolutionary mismatch we talked about earlier. Our bodies are wired to react to modern stressors as if they are life or death situations.
Yeah, when in reality, most of the time they're not.
Exactly. We have the power to reassess those modern lions, see them for what they really are.
Right. Deadlines, traffic, difficult people.
Exactly. They might be unpleasant.
Yeah.
But they're not going to eat us.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. It's about taking back control, reframing our perceptions, remembering that we are not just helpless zebras running from lions.
Precisely. And this actually leads us to another really fascinating topic.
Ooh, okay.
Successful aging.
Successful aging. No, that's something I'm definitely interested in that.
Me too. We've talked a lot about how stress can speed up aging and increase the risk of disease.
Yeah, not good.
But there are people who manage to age gracefully,
Yeah.
maintaining their physical and mental health well into their later years.
Okay, I am all ears. What's her secret? Good genes. A lifetime supply of antioxidants.
Well, it's more complicated than that. While genetics definitely play a role, lifestyle and psychological factors, those are really important for successful aging too. And one of the most crucial, you guessed it.
Social connections. I knew it. They're like the superhero of this whole story.
They really are. There's even research on baboons that shows this.
Baboons.
Yeah.
Are they really known for their, graceful aging?
Maybe not, but they are actually quite similar to humans in terms of their social complexity and lifespan, and they engage in a lot of social grooming, which helps reduce stress and strengthen those social bonds.
So, it's their version of, hanging out with friends and having a good gossip session.
Exactly, and it seems to have real benefits for their well-being. And this underscores a key point about successful aging.
Okay.
It's not just about avoiding disease,
Mm-hmm.
it's about maintaining a high quality of life, both physically and mentally.
So social connections are key for aging well. What else is important?
Certain personality traits also seem to be protective. People who are adaptable, optimistic, and able to regulate their emotions, they tend to age better.
So it's not about being, happy-go-lucky all the time.
Right.
It's about being able to roll with the punches and bounce back from setbacks.
That's a great way to put it. And it goes back to that idea of control. People who feel like they have some control over their lives, even as they face the challenges of aging, they tend to be more resilient and less stressed.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've got social connections,
Yep.
positive outlook, a sense of control. What about those lifestyle factors? Those have to be important too, right?
They are, of course, a healthy diet, regular exercise, avoiding smoking and excessive alcohol. All those things can help slow down the aging process and reduce the risk of those age-related diseases.
Yeah, the things our doctors keep reminding us about.
Exactly, but it's not just about following strict rules. It's about finding a lifestyle that works for you, that brings you joy and a sense of purpose.
So finding that sweet spot between healthy habits and actually enjoying life.
You got it. And there's a fascinating study,
Okay.
the Harvard study of adult development,
Oh, yeah.
that really illustrates this point. Back in 1941, they decided to track a group of healthy, well-adjusted Harvard undergrads for the rest of their lives.
Okay, so they started with a pretty healthy group of guys.
They did, yes. And what they found was that these men had half the mortality rate of their Harvard peers.
Wait, half. So they were living longer and healthier lives than their already privileged classmates.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about genes or wealth. The researchers found that the things that best predicted their longevity and well-being were the quality of their relationships,
Okay.
their ability to handle stress, and having a sense of purpose in life.
It sounds like they were really focusing on the things that truly matter: connection, resilience, and meaning.
You nailed it. And the Harvard study underscores just how important it is to cultivate those psychological and social resources throughout our lives.
Yeah, this is pretty inspiring. It's like a roadmap for living a longer, healthier, and more fulfilling life.
It really is. And it all comes back to that core message.
Okay.
We're not helpless. We have the power to make choices that support our well-being, to manage stress, and to age successfully.
Okay, we've explored the science behind stress. We've delved into those coping mechanisms. We've even touched on the secrets of successful aging. Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to take a quick detour into another fascinating topic related to stress.
Okay.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. I'm always up for talking about that.
We've spent a lot of time talking about how stress can make us feel bad, both physically and emotionally. But our brains are also hardwired to experience pleasure.
Yeah.
And understanding those pleasure pathways, it can actually be really helpful when it comes to managing stress.
That's an interesting connection. How does pleasure help us cope with stress?
Well, for starters, experiencing pleasure releases dopamine, one of those feel-good chemicals that plays a key role in motivation, learning, and just feeling good. When you do things that you enjoy, whether it's listening to music, spending time with loved ones, enjoying a delicious meal, your brain releases dopamine, and this can help counteract the negative effects of stress.
So it's like giving your brain a little reward to balance out all that stress.
Exactly. And there's even evidence that just anticipating pleasure can be as rewarding as the experience itself.
Really? So even just thinking about something enjoyable can release dopamine?
It can, and this emphasizes an important point about stress management.
Okay.
It's not just about avoiding stress altogether, it's also about making time for things that bring you joy, savoring those pleasurable experiences, and looking forward to things that make you feel good.
So it's about that balance between minimizing stress and maximizing pleasure.
Exactly. And this brings us to a topic that can be a little tricky.
Okay.
Drugs.
Drugs. I have a feeling this is where the conversation takes a darker turn.
Well, not necessarily. So drugs can definitely be misused and have negative consequences, but I think it's important to understand how they work and how they relate to the brain's pleasure pathways.
Okay, I'm listening.
So many drugs, especially addictive drugs, they work by basically hijacking those dopamine pathways in your brain.
Okay.
They flood the brain with dopamine, creating that intense feeling of euphoria or pleasure.
So they're sort of like short-circuiting the brain's natural reward system?
Exactly. And the problem is that over time, your brain can become desensitized to these artificial surges of dopamine, meaning you need higher and higher doses of the drug to get that same feeling.
That's how addiction develops. You need more and more of the drug just to feel normal.
Exactly. And when you stop using the drug, your brain struggles to readjust to normal dopamine levels, which is why people experience those withdrawal symptoms. And I think you can see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
People often turn to drugs to try to cope with stress, to numb those unpleasant feelings.
It makes sense. They're looking for an escape.
Yeah.
But drugs, they might provide some temporary relief, but ultimately they make the problem worse by disrupting the brain's natural reward system.
Yeah, it becomes harder and harder to experience pleasure from normal everyday activities.
Exactly. And then you have the added stress of addiction on top of everything else.
It's a vicious cycle. Stress leads to drug use, which leads to even more stress. That's why finding those healthy coping mechanisms is so important.
Absolutely. We need to nourish our bodies and minds,
Yeah.
not deplete them.
Okay, ditch the drugs, find healthy coping mechanisms. Got it. But what about those of us who just aren't naturally wired to be like all happy and optimistic all the time? What if you're naturally prone to worry and negativity?
That's a great question, and it brings us back to that idea of perspective. While we may not be able to change our basic temperament, we can learn to challenge those negative thought patterns and cultivate a more balanced way of thinking.
So it's not about denying those negative emotions, but about learning to handle them more effectively.
Exactly. And this is where mindfulness and meditation come in.
Mindfulness and meditation, those are both really popular these days. But what's the connection to stress?
Well, mindfulness is about being present in the moment without judgment. It's about observing your thoughts and feelings without letting them sweep you away. And meditation is a practice that helps to cultivate mindfulness.
So you're learning to simply notice those thoughts and emotions without getting all caught up in them.
Exactly. And there's more and more research showing that mindfulness and meditation have some pretty amazing stress-reducing benefits. Things like lower blood pressure, reduced anxiety, better sleep, even a boost to your immune system.
Wow. So it's not just about feeling calmer. There are actual physiological changes happening.
Exactly. That's what's so exciting about these practices.
Yeah.
They tap into our own innate ability to heal and find balance.
Okay. I'm convinced I'm starting a meditation practice tonight. But what about those big, unavoidable stressors in life? Things like serious illness or the loss of a loved one. Those situations can feel so overwhelming.
They can. It's totally natural to feel helpless in those circumstances.
Yeah.
But even then, there are things we can do to find meaning, build resilience, and connect with our own inner strength.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some ways to cope with those major life challenges?
One thing that can be really powerful is finding a way to reframe the situation, to see it as an opportunity for growth, even amidst the pain.
So finding meaning and purpose in the midst of suffering.
Exactly. And this can take many forms, whether it's through writing, art, spending time in nature, or connecting with your spiritual beliefs.
It's about those things that feed your soul and help you feel connected to something larger than yourself.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget the importance of social support.
Our old friend, social support, always there to help us through.
Talking to trusted friends and family, seeking professional help if you need it, joining a support group, those things can provide a sense of connection and understanding during those really tough times.
So it's about reaching out and letting people in, even when it's hard.
Exactly. You don't have to go through it alone. And sometimes just knowing that someone cares, that can make all the difference.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling more hopeful after that.
Yeah.
It's like we've journeyed through all the tough stuff and come out on the other side, equipped with all this knowledge and tools for navigating life's storms.
That's a great way to put it. And that's really the whole point of this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the science of stress. It's about giving you the power to make choices that support your well-being, to create a life that's not just about surviving, but truly thriving.
Well said. And speaking of thriving, I'm curious, what are some of the things you personally do to manage stress?
That's a great question. I'm a big believer in the power of nature. I try to spend as much time outdoors as possible, whether it's hiking, gardening, or just finding a quiet spot to sit under a tree and listen to the birds.
That sounds so restorative.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I also find that being creative, whether it's writing or playing music, that helps me process emotions and channel my energy in positive ways.
Those are all great outlets.
They are.
Yeah.
And I've recently started to make mindfulness a bigger part of my daily routine. Even just a few minutes of focused breathing can completely shift how I'm feeling.
Yeah. Mindfulness is a game changer. It's all about finding those practices that work for you and making them a regular part of your life.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about creating those little pockets of peace and presence in your day.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this deep dive. The
Mhm.
key takeaway here is that we have more power over our stress than we often think. By understanding the science, by building those healthy coping mechanisms into our lives, and by choosing to focus on things that bring us joy and meaning, we can create a life that's not just about getting by, but truly thriving.
Well said. And since we're talking about thriving, I'd love to leave our listeners with this. Given everything we've explored today, what's one small step you can take today to manage stress in your own life?
That's a great question to ponder. I hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and tools to work with. And remember, stress is a part of life, but it doesn't have to control your life. You have the power to understand it, manage it, and ultimately to use it as fuel for growth and resilience.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you today. Until next time.
Wow, what a deep dive that was into the world of stress.
I know, right? We really covered a lot of ground.
We did. It's amazing how much stress impacts our lives and in so many different ways.
It really is. But the good news is we don't have to let it control us.
Exactly. We have the power to manage stress and to use it as an opportunity for growth and resilience.
That's the key takeaway here, and I hope our listeners are walking away feeling empowered, not overwhelmed.
Me too. We've given them a whole toolkit of strategies to work with.
Right, from social support and exercise to mindfulness, and even reframing those negative thought patterns.
It's all about finding what works for you and making it a part of your daily life.
And remember, this isn't the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning.
There's a whole world of information out there about stress and how to manage it, and we encourage you to keep learning and exploring.
Keep experimenting until you find what works best for you, because stress management is a lifelong journey, not a one-time fix.
So true. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think back to everything we've discussed today. All those fascinating insights about stress and how it can impact your mind and body. I want you to ask yourself this. What's one small step you can take today to manage stress in your own life?
That's a great question. It could be something as simple as taking a few deep breaths.
Yeah, or calling a friend.
Or going for a walk in nature.
Or maybe it's something a bit bigger, like starting a meditation practice or finally committing to that regular exercise routine.
Whatever it is, make a conscious choice to prioritize your well-being.
You deserve to live a life that's not just about surviving, but about truly thriving.
Well said. It's been a pleasure diving deep with you today. Until next time, happy stress busting.
Take care, everyone.